was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off of Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals." Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. The Roman stockade in those days was right next to the wall around the city that led onto the temple area. So there's actually it was like a military base, like right next to the wall of the city. So that's what the Iron Gate is. And it wasn't like a police station. I mean, it was a military barracks. So it's quite a different feeling then as it is today. It opened for them by itself, and they went through. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen." When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this," he said, and then he left for another place. In the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and then ordered that they be executed. So what do you see? What struck you? Peter obeys without question. Limited understanding, but obeys without question. Yeah, church is praying earnestly. Not just praying, but earnestly. So there's it suggests there's comfort there. He doesn't know how it's going to happen, but he's got some trust in God. Yeah. I have our time sleeping the night before I go to the dentist, so let alone, the thing he was suffering from. Yes. Yeah, James is executed. Peter, if I'm Peter and James has just been executed, I might be a little more nervous than that. But yeah, those two they're linked stories, certainly. Yeah, there seems like an awful lot of security, right? They got 16 guards and he's sleeping chained to people. Yeah, it does seem excessive, but apparently they're used to unusual things happening, like you said. Okay. Well, take a closer look. It's about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. So the word church is ecclesia in Greek, and it's not the same as synagogue. So we're now about 4 or 5 years after the crucifixion resurrection. So there's been enough time that the Christian community has been formed, and people are aware that there's something that people who are Christians are not the same as people who are Jews. The Jews certainly know that, but even Even the authorities know that. And it's very hard for us to understand this because we've had 2,000 years of monotheism. But the Roman and Greek religion, they didn't believe in the gods. They didn't trust the gods. The gods didn't care for them. The gods are like giant, all-powerful 13-year-olds, right? They're not moral. They're not responsible. And so if something's gone wrong in your life, you just figure out what God you've inadvertently upset, and it takes maybe 20 seconds to offer a sacrifice, and that's it. You're done. So the idea of a God who cares for you and a God who desires moral development, that's just brand new to the Romans. And so this all was very confusing to them. Intending to persecute. Wow. Yeah, I really hope no one's intending to persecute me personally, but it might be happening. And then what's so interesting is Pilate found Jesus innocent. Remember that? I find no charge against him, but I'll crucify him anyway. He, that is Herod, had James' brother John put to death with the sword. So who was Herod? Now this is Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great. So not the Herod that was alive when Jesus was born. And he had a half-brother, Herod Archelaus, and they were in charge of, Herod Antipas was in charge of Galilee and what today is southern Lebanon, and parts of what is the Transjordan, so the other side, the eastern side of the Jordan River, opposite Galilee and stuff like that. So they're smaller pieces. Now these are all part of the Roman Empire, but the Romans, they often had client states or lieutenants to rule in their stead, because they knew that a lot of people didn't really like them Romans being in charge. So they would bring in a surrogate to be their representative. So that's what's happening here. A little later on, we know when Paul gets arrested and he has to go up to Damascus to be and Caesarea to be interviewed. Now they've done away with the Herod family and they've got a regular Roman governor. So that's what's going on there. So anyway, this Herod died in 39. And he ruled Galilee and the Transjordan. So probably 5 or 6 years after the crucifixion, resurrection is when this takes place. So what can we take away from this? Well, we should expect opposition. That's going to be normal. Expect it. If you don't expect it, well, you're not planning appropriately. Expect opposition. Somebody is going to be threatened. And the world, right, is often violent. That's the rule for most of human history. Violence. Not the exception. People can be violent. Organizations can be violent. Maybe not in a physical way, but they can treat you like you are nothing. And cultures can be violent. Pilate had found Jesus innocent, but executed him anyway. When he saw that this met with the approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. The first and last day of Passover was celebrated with unleavened bread. So this is a Passover, probably 5-6 years after Jesus. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for a public trial after the Passover. So what kind of leader is Herod? He wants to placate people. He was willing to appeal to their baser instincts. Sound familiar? Happens a lot in human history. And Herod arrested Peter. So we ought to expect the pattern of this world to be not honest. We should expect that. We should expect that from the world around us. Or at least not be surprised. We should always approach others with charity and goodwill and thinking the best, but not be surprised when something else happens. So what kind of leaders do what's popular just because it's popular? Now, those ones you really want to be around, like to be a part of that group. The people expected a political Messiah, right? Acts 1:6. This is what his own disciples say to the resurrected Jesus. They're absolutely blown away that he's come back to life. So we're 6 verses into the book of Acts, and Peter says, "Are you now going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" They're still thinking it's about politics. It's about our nation against everybody else. They're still thinking of this world, like Cain, who was expelled east of Eden and hoped for no more than he could see. He didn't raise his eyes up to heaven. He only wanted to build stuff on this earth. So a Messiah of them, of this world, of kingdom, of politics. Can this world be heaven on earth? So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. So being in prison, I think, would be what we would call a disaster, right? I've had a few conversations with police in my day, mostly involving traffic issues. I'm never really happy about that. I drove a delivery truck for a long time, so that would increase the chances of me having conversations with police. But there's very little in life that we can control, right? Very little. I wasn't born in 13th century Italy. I can't control where I was born or to whom I was born. So there's very little we can control. So Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, died in 180, as you can see, a Stoic philosopher, said, "We're better off if we worry only about our inner life. Because station can be taken away. Stuff can be taken away. If we fall in love with those things take over our lives." That's why Augustine said, "Be careful what you love, because we become subject to the things we love. And subjects cannot judge. We lose the ability to understand our relationship with that thing." So what can we conclude? Well, we ought to expect the world to be tricksy. We ought to expect it not to treat us fairly. We ought to expect that sometimes we get more than we deserve. A lot of times we get less than we deserve. Some who are evil or selfish or cannot escape the gravitational pull of their own selves get rewarded. Right? It happens. Some people are born into really wealthy circumstances, and their parents got enough to send them to certain schools, and they meet certain people, and then they start life. Like if life is a 400 meter race, they start life at the 300 meter spot. None of us can control that. And maybe some of them not only just be rewarded, but be placed in positions of power. So what can we actually control? We can control how we think about life. And so we should live a life of principle. We should live a life of conscious dependence upon God. Lord, I am your servant. I can't control what happens today, but I can have influence on how I live today. And I want to live my life today under the leadership of your Spirit. Not under the leadership of my desire, not under the leadership of the stuff, the less, the more animalistic part of me wants. Less of me, more of you every day. Don't trust in stuff. Because we fall in love with stuff. We fall in love with stuff, and then after we have it for 2 days, we see the new version of that stuff. And now we don't like the old stuff anymore. And we go and buy the new stuff, and another 3 days later, so nothing ever satisfies. There was a guy named Theodor Adorno. He's a sociologist, left Nazi Germany in the 30s because he was Jewish, had to leave. And he moved to LA, of all things. And he became fascinated with drive-through burger joints and Southern California culture. And he called Walt Disney the most dangerous person in America because he was teaching us to be short attention spanned, to seek entertainment. So, don't trust in stuff or money or talent or charm. Trust instead in God. So being in prison might be what we would call or think of as a disaster. But what if it's God's plan? God can bring good out of our mess. Isn't that great? I've made some messes in my life. And somehow, in spite of me, God was able to turn it into something good. Sometimes God needs to knock us on the head, slap us on the side of the head to get our attention. That's happened to me. Has that ever happened to you? I see 3 hands. That's it. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Get up, quick," he said. And the chains fell off Peter's wrists. The chains fell off. The miraculous is possible in your life right now, in mine too. Right now, it's possible. But like the Rolling Stones sang, sometimes we get what we need, maybe not what we want. But it turns out what we need is what we ought to be wanting. So the miraculous is possible. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals." Not quite clear what he was wearing instead, but put on your clothes and sandals. And Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea what the angel was doing, that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. He didn't know what was happening was real. Right? Isn't that true? Like sometimes when it's happening to me, I fail to recognize what's really significant and what's insignificant. What comes to mind right away is Christine and I, we've been married for 42 years. We met on October 9th, 1982. And we dated for a couple of months. And on, I think it was maybe December 23rd, that night, her family was driving to Southern California to be with family the next day. And we're kissing on the front porch of her parents' house. And she says to me, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you." And what I said was, "I like you too." And I am smooth as. And I got about 3 blocks away from her house, and it suddenly sort of like dawned on me the gravity of this all. And this is so long ago that I had to go to a payphone, right, to call my dad and say, I need to talk. And so maybe a week and a half later, when they came back, I proposed. I didn't know what was happening. It was happening to me, around me. I just was dumb as a post. No idea. Pretty typical. Sometimes we fail to read the signs right in front of us. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. And when they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. The angel left him, right? Sometimes we got to learn to walk on our own. We follow. We follow, we learn, and having followed, we become adults. And others follow us. So, but who do we follow right now? What tune are we following? Is it the tune of our culture? Is it the tune of our friends? What tune is it? Are we even aware what tune it is we're listening to? And do we even have an idea who it is that's looking to us as a leader, as someone that should be followed? And Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know, without a doubt, that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping it would happen." When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. So he came to himself, right? We've had those experiences. We suddenly realize we've been totally out of touch with what's really going on. It dawned on him. Growing realization. That's human. And who does he run to? Well, like I said, leaders walk in front of us, and then leaders walk alongside of us, and then leaders watch us lead. Your pastor does a great job of this, I think. A gifted brother. And then we know where to go. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she got so excited and overjoyed, she ran back without opening the door and exclaimed, Peter's at the door. You ever done something like that? When you're so excited, you sort of miss. Yeah, I've done that. She let Peter outside. But note the closeness of relationship. You ever think about what life was like for a community like City Church 100 years ago? Before TV, before radios, before cars, where the fastest really you go anywhere, most people, is as fast as you could walk, and not being interrupted by your phone. Think about the luxury of spending a couple hours with a good friend in the 2 or 3 hours it would take just to go 15 miles. And we are bombarded all the time. We are being trained to have a short attention span and not really listen to one another. Note the closeness of relationship. And many Americans are isolated, and many American men report they have no friends. Why that isolation? And there was a book came out even 30 years ago called "We're Amusing Ourselves to Death." And now that's just been turbocharged with all the options. Yeah, you're out of your mind, they told her. And she kept insisting it was so. They said it must be his angel. But Peter kept on knocking. When they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this, he said, and then he left for another place. So tell the story, right? Stories have power, right? Have you ever been listening to a sermon and you're not really listening? It looks like you are, but you're zoning out? Has that ever happened to you? It happens to me. It's happened to me while I was preaching. Seriously. I mean, that's not just funny. It is funny, but it actually has happened a couple of times. But stories have power, right? Because we can relate. But it's also not abstract. I mean, we can imagine ourselves in that spot. So tell the story, right? That's what Peter does. In the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards and then ordered that they be executed. I'm going to be in line for that job early tomorrow morning when the recruitment office opens. So executed the guards, right? The power of the state. So 3 big observations to conclude. Observation number 1, Peter is in prison. The gospel is a threat. It's a threat. It's a threat to the world and the way of the world. Because the gospel says it ain't about stuff. The gospel says it's not about power. The gospel says every human being is a treasure. Everyone in this room, look around the room. Look at people near you. These are treasures made in God's image. Every person you meet on the way out, every person you drive by, even the person who's angry at the way you're driving, is a treasure in God's sight. But the gospel's a threat to the way of the world, because the way of the world don't believe that. It's even a threat to organized religion. Can be. Why? Because it challenges the status quo. The church is at its best when it is always subversive. When it understands subversion as corrosion for good. Restless. So, Virgil's great epic, the Aeneid, has this line about Aeneas himself, the hero, who's going to end up founding the city of Rome. But there's a line where he's sailing to ever-receding shores. You never actually get there. Because in this life, the kingdom of God will never be able fully to live it out. It's always just beyond, because we remain faulted, broken people. But we should always be striving for it. But not only that, but the kingdom, while we're striving for it, we're sailing for it, the kingdom is drawing us towards it. There's this line right in the book of Acts where they cast an anchor out from the ship, and it grabs hold of it attaches to a rock near the shore, and they pull themselves to shore. Like if we were all going to get in a church bus and drive to Los Angeles later on today, we would all be saying, we're going to Los Angeles. None of us would say, Los Angeles is pulling us towards it. But that's the way God works. God is actually drawing us towards his purpose. So the church is subversive. It's a corrosion for good. It's restless. Because the siren song of the world is stuff, money, power, right? So years ago, I was a TA grading papers at the University of California. Friday afternoon, 4:45, a kid comes in, and he got an F on his test because there were 2 essay questions and he only answered 1. And he said, why did I get an F, Dave? And I said, well, you only answered 1. So 50, even if I gave you 50 out of 50, it's still an F. He swore at me and then walked out. I went to get in walked out of my office, get to my car, which was a 1979 diesel Volkswagen Rabbit. Like the bottom of the car pyramid. And as I was putting the key in, I looked up, and there across the street was that same kid putting his key in the car of a brand new BMW. And our eyes met, and then he said, who's got the power now, Dave? And I said, You do. Right? Because that's it. Money, man. Money gets you in. That's how our world works. Money, stuff, power. But also fear. You notice that? There's a lot of fear. So Frank Ferretti, Hungarian Canadian, born in Hungary, lives in Canada, maybe the world's greatest authority on the sociology of fear. So wrote a book called Culture of Fear in 1997 and How Fear Works just 6 years ago. In Culture of Fear, Ferretti argued that fear is on the rise. This was more than 20 years ago. 9/11, disease, environmental collapse, social dislocation, and it's clearly on the rise in our country. There are folks who are stoking that, right? Throwing gasoline-soaked wood onto that fire. But we also fear achievements. We fear vaccines as a culture. We fear genetically modified foods. We sometimes fear technology, and other times we have blind trust in it. Isn't that interesting? Fear is increasing. And so some people actually want us to start fearing each other. In How Fear Works, 6 years ago, Ferretti argued that the origin of contemporary fear is the unraveling of moral authority. This has caused dis-ease, right? I mean, just how things work and what you could trust in our country, that has led to dis-ease in a sense that we can't control threats. We have lost trust, and so we lose trust in one another. And we don't really know each other as a culture as well as we used to. Think of all the gated communities that are far from anyone who wants to rob the people in them. So this has caused dis-ease, and with it a sense that we cannot control threats. We have lost trust in one another, and Ferretti asks what role the media plays in amplifying this dynamic. He asked that question 6 years ago. The media is playing an outsized role, if you ask me, even since then. So we have collectively lost trust in lots of our leaders, in organizations, and that has led us to lose trust in one another because we don't really know one another as well. Observation number 2. What is the path forward for us then? Well, take seriously the seductive power of this world. Pay attention to how easily seduced you are and I am. Now, the great Augustine, St. Augustine, who died in 430 AD, his book, City of God, maybe one of the 4 most important books ever written. And Augustine was African. He was born in modern-day Tunisia. So he's not some white guy, from England. He's African. Berber. His mother was Berber. So in this City of God, he said, and by city, he doesn't mean like Sacramento or Stockton. He means population. He said there are actually there is a population that's loyal to God and a population that's loyal to Satan. But there's a third city, this earth, this world. And in this world, this life that you and I live in, citizens of the one city and the other intermingle all the time. And we influence each other for good or ill. And so his point is, we can never have a truly Christian state. You can't do it. Because anytime you do that, the forces of the city of this world are going to be successful in influencing and infiltrating and polluting. So we should always keep in mind that our true loyalty is in heaven. That's why St. Paul said in 2 Corinthians, we are ambassadors here. Once we become Christians, our true citizenship is in heaven, and we're ambassadors here. An ambassador, right? They live in a country not their own. But if they're any good, they actually understand the country in which they're living. And if they're real good, they have affection and love for its people. So, this text is telling us, let's remember that our citizenship is somewhere else. And we are representatives of the kingdom here. So, how to live in but avoid being shaped by this world. Don't be saddled by the way things have always been. The world operates by force, Herod, and the executions, and status and desire for self. But let's remember, the next line is Luther's, that we experience life as, the Latin is incurvatus in se. We are curved in upon ourselves. It's very hard to escape the gravitational pull of our own desire, right? It comes out sometimes. I'm pretty happy to let 2 or 3 people get, when I'm waiting in the grocery store, you drive right next to the grocery store and then you got to find a place to park and you let 2 or 3 people pass in front of you. But if number 4 starts asking, I'm like, not so much, That's about all the human kindness I got right now. Because it's really important for me to get home because there may be Andy Griffith reruns on TV, I can find. So that's how it means to be a human in this broken life. We are curved in upon ourselves. So third and last observation. So what is the path for us then? Well, let's embrace Augustine's model, the 3 cities model. We are citizens of heaven, not of this world primarily. Now there's a guy named Boethius. He died in 524 AD. And he was an official of one of the successor states of the Roman Empire. Towards the end, it wasn't really a Roman Empire, it wasn't really Roman, it was Germanic tribes who were taken over. And after a while, they just quit calling it the Roman Empire. So this is one of the first kings who was just calling it a Germanic kingdom. So Boethius was a scholar who lived in the Ostrogoth kingdom of Theodoric in the early 500s. The paranoid king asked Boethius to assume an important role in government, and then I think it was like 11 months later, in 530, he abruptly threw him into prison. And then executed him a few months later. And he knew he was going to be executed. So imagine what he was thinking, sitting in that cell. In prison, thinking about his fate, he spent a couple weeks in a pity party, and then he composed one of the great books in Western history, The Consolation of Philosophy. Lady Fortune spins her wheel, the wheel of fortune. And her gifts, wealth, career, she can arbitrarily grant, and she can arbitrarily take them away. Chaucer translated this into English, and it provided the intellectual structure for Dante's Divine Comedy. And in his vision, he's visited by Lady Philosophy, who tells him that human beings can control almost nothing that happens to them. That's the wheel of fortune from the 1500s. So, Boethius says, don't ignore this world. Understand it. It's seductive. It knows just how to break into your heart. Last night, I responded to the call of the ice cream in the garage. I put it in the garage so it'd be harder for me to give in to temptation, but I responded. And having done all that work to get it out of the garage, I thought it'd be a pity not to really take advantage of this situation and have a double scoop and not just one. That's a dumb example, but isn't that our lives? So don't ignore the seductive power of this world. Don't ignore the hooks it's got on you. Don't ignore that it already has established deep ruts in your heart that you fall into just naturally. Have a proper perspective. Don't put your trust in the world, but with humility, cast yourself into the arms of God. Spend time building your inner citadel and build relationships. I'll ask you once again, look around the room here. We're almost done, so you can look around the room. Look in the eyes of folks. These are treasures in God's sight. These are your rescuers. We need each other. Because without casting ourselves into this, we're lost. We're lost and alone, and our own selfishness will swallow us up. So, be in, but not of the world. Amen?